Major news out on Friday. Federal prosecutors are not going to be able to use that obstruction law to prosecute some members of the pro-Trump protesters on January 6th. The Supreme Court has issued its ruling saying that basically these prosecutors, they overstepped their bounds. They went too far with those January 6th charges. This is amazing. You know, this is a lot of what you've heard, certainly from me. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not pretending to know this in such intricate details, but it has often seemed a little bit like common sense, the way that they have gone after these individuals. I mean, it could in fact have a pretty significant effect on the case that Jack Smith and company are bringing against Donald Trump. But before we get to that, let's consider what just went down. Basically, federal prosecutors improperly used a law that was on the books, a law going all the way back to 2002. And they used this law to go after people that were protesting there on January 6th. And they did so in a way that the court has found was not actually legal. In other words, they overstepped. They used too large a justification. Now, one of the things I find really, really fascinating about this is that it was 6-3, but it had some unusual alliances. And I actually think that's really healthy right now. Because, you know what they tell us. I mean, we just had to listen to Nancy Pelosi the other day say that she had no faith in the Supreme Court. They are trying to undermine this institution, but it's going to make it harder when one of their own, so to speak, that would be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is a liberal, voted with the majority and filed a concerning opinion. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a conservative, she actually wrote the dissent. Now, it's fascinating in that sense, because let me share with you what Justice Jackson said. She said that the January 6th, while she agreed that it was this assault on democracy, she did say, and I quote for you, on January 6, 2021, an angry mob stormed the United States Capitol seeking to prevent Congress from fulfilling its constitutional duty to certify the electoral votes in the 2020 presidential election. The peaceful transfer of power is a fundamental democratic norm, and those who attempted to disrupt it in this way inflicted a deep wound on the nation. But, okay, this is an important but, ladies and gentlemen. This is a liberal justice, remember. She writes, today's case is not about the immorality of those acts. Instead, the question before this court is far narrower. What is the scope of the particular crime Congress has outlined? Now, a broader reading of the law, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, would actually criminalize a broad swath of prosaic conduct, exposing activists and lobbyists alike to decades in prison. This is exactly what we have been saying all along, right? You can't just go super broad because you're going to get everyone in there. So it doesn't make any sense. So in other words, now you have Roberts, who is a conservative, and you have Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, a liberal, still deciding on the same exact thing here, that you just can't go that broad and just try and sweep everyone in as much as you would like. Jack Smith, I realize, okay, you got a lousy candidate. We know you got a lousy candidate, for goodness sakes. You got such a lousy candidate. He's getting fact-checked in real time by the Border Patrol.
Increase the number of
right? Remember this one?
By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position.
No, they didn't. They put this one out right afterwards. In other words, this guy is so bad that they are resorting to 91 indictments to go after him. They're trying to charge him $500 million in New York. And Letitia James, my gosh. And they're going after him in creative new ways that fundamentally are at odds with who we are. They're just wrong, okay? This is what he's up against. I mean, you got every single person now, even every columnist in the New York Times saying, bye. You know what? We're friends, but you're done, buddy, okay? You're lousy. Quote, President Biden is my friend. He must bow out of the race. That's coming from Tom Friedman, okay, guys? So you combine that, ladies and gentlemen, with what we just heard from the Supreme Court, which is that Jack Smith is way out over his skis. Thank you very much. And you got a situation where they are desperately trying to prevent Donald Trump from winning, but they are utilizing their powers in ways that they can't and in ways that they shouldn't. And that's frankly pretty darn alarming. There were over 1,400 people who were charged with an array of offenses on that day. And perhaps the biggest question right now is what's going to happen to 52 of them, 52 people who have been convicted exclusively under the law with no other charge, 27 of whom are currently serving sentences in federal prison. Well, basically, the Supreme Court said, it's not going to work. You guys are up a creek without a paddle. So if that's the case, we now have evidence that the federal government is willing to go too far. I mean, thank goodness you do have a Supreme Court. And I do realize that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and anyone else you listen to is going to try and belittle this court because it's not doing what they want. But that's one of the reasons why it's actually really important and interesting to see that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson actually agreed that you can't expand the scope of that law. And while she believes in the peaceful transfer of power and she's not condoning anything that happened, you cannot actually convict these individuals under that. So the question remains, what does this actually mean for Donald Trump? Right? Because there's another federal case against Donald Trump accusing him of plotting to overturn that 2020 loss at the polls. I would just say this, though. I'm going to leave you with this thought, because if, in fact, he firmly believed, and I do believe that he thought this, that there were abnormalities in the process, is he not entitled to check on those? I mean, Hillary Clinton would have. In fact, Hillary Clinton actually said her advice to Joe Biden on a podcast just weeks before the election was to hang on for dear life if it was close, to not give up, to never give up. Well, it was close in some places. And Donald Trump took that advice. And he decided not to give up. I mean, unfortunately, you're up against a deadline there. And that deadline was what then landed him in all of this trouble. I mean, I don't know what it means for the future. Perhaps the answer is we need to be a little less divided. And I'll tell you, for November, he's got to win big in order to not have us entrenched in this kind of insanity. But maybe it also means that the turnaround time needs to be a little bit greater, because there's not a lot of time there, right, between November, when the election happens, and then when the new presidency is ushered in. And in an environment such as the one we live right now, where the left is willing to go to, frankly, enormous lengths to make sure that they still win, then I think we're going to have a problem. I mean, enormous lengths. Consider what went down. Russia, for example. I mean, that was opposition research bought and paid for by the likes of Hillary Clinton's campaign, the law firm representing her campaign that funneled it through Fusion GPS, that funneled it through a former British intel op, Christopher Steele. I mean, wow. So we dealt with that. We had to deal with the 51 people who said, oh, you know what, there's no way, there's 51 ex-spooks, no way that Hunter Biden's laptop is actually real. That's just opposition research fed to you, courtesy of the Russians and Rudy Giuliani. They threw him in for good measure. And now we had to learn all about what? Cheap fakes, over and over and over again. Somehow, when the media was willing to call out, as we did right here on this show, the feebleness of Joe Biden, you weren't supposed to do that. No, you weren't supposed to do that because it wasn't real. It was just edited stuff. This is what the media went with. This is what the White House went with just the other day. Good thing we had that debate.
Yeah, and I think you all have called this the cheap fakes video, and that's exactly what they are. They are cheap fakes video. They are done in bad faith, and some of your news organization have been very clear, have stressed that these the right wing critics of the president have a credibility problem because of the fact checkers have repeatedly caught them pushing misinformation, disinformation, and so we see this, and this is something coming from your part of the world, calling them cheap fakes and misinformation. And I'll quote the Washington Post, where they wrote about this, and they said how Republicans use misleading videos to attack Biden in a 24-hour period.
Not actually true. You know what? Maybe the video was cut short, but no one was making up the falls. Nobody was making up how he walked or put on his sunglasses. That's all for real, KJP and Washington Post. And now guess what else is real? The Supreme Court says you guys went too far. So you know what that means? All those lower courts out there, they're now going to have to apply a different standard. And it may lead to many of these charges against many of these individuals being dismissed. Hey, make sure that you like, make sure that you share, make sure that you subscribe to this channel, and make sure you go to 76research.com, my company that I co-founded with a very dear friend, for all your financial research. I'll see you back here tomorrow.